right, it's only a week, maybe not even that long, until the Ontario election coming up on June 7th. Once again, not one word has been mentioned on organ donations. George Marcello states, for the past 30 years, Ontario has become complacent in the fact that we are still the lowest organ donor country in the world. If you were told you were going to die and there were options to explore that could save your life, you would do everything you could to explore those options. Mr. Marcello added, our government has not explored everything. Instead, what has happened is if our way does not work, then just die. George added, I have been hospitalized many times this past year, and every day someone was still dying because an organ didn't arrive. Recently, the UK unanimously passed a soft opt-out similar to the Spanish model, or otherwise known as presumed consent. Canada is similar to the UK in many ways. George has been relentless in asking each candidate to join him today on thatchannel.com or any other media outlet and make an announcement that if elected, their government will build an Ontario referendum on UK soft opt-out and see what Ontarians think. George is confident Ontarians will approve it and many, many more lives can be saved. He is in need of a kidney transplant. George is one of those people, and George Marcello is joining us here on Liquid Lunch today. George, great to have you back in the studio.
Great opening.
Well, it was very well written, and I'm very happy to have you here today and talk about this whole issue. So, George,
thank you.
I guess there's some other things happening in the news. So some of those media people couldn't be here today, but you did an interview earlier with 680 News
yeah.
and some other outlets, and so now we're glad to have you here. Must be a busy day for you.
Yes, I left this phone here open, and I got my computer going because any minute I could receive a call from one of the candidates saying that they're going to commit to this, and we would rapidly make arrangements to accommodate that. Or waiting for any other media outlet to phone. The media love this story as well. It's like the race between the NDP and the PCs are so tight right now, neck and neck. Where are those extra votes going to come from? Mm-hmm. They've explored every possible way of where they're going to get their votes, but they haven't thought about this issue yet. And if one of them decides to take on this pledge, I will guarantee that they will win the election. That's where extra votes can come from.
Yeah.
Because it's been 30 years, and there's hundreds of thousands of Ontarians that have been affected by this, and that can't wait to see an opt-out system finally come to Ontario.
So maybe you can just describe what that is. What's our current system, and what are the inadequacies of it, and then what's the new system that you're trying to get put on the radar, the public agenda in Ontario?
Great. So the system that we've been working with the past 30 years in Ontario and throughout Canada is basically called the opt-in system, where people are asked to either register or sign their driver's license or OHIP cards, depending which province you live, and indicate that you would want to be an organ donor. Mm-hmm. The family can override that decision, and usually have, and it's done many times. People who do want to become organ donors lead very busy lives, even though, would want to be an organ donor. They just don't get around going to that next step, even though it takes 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. They just don't do it. it's been a hard sell to our minority communities, especially the big cities, where only 20% of Torontonians have registered.
So Toronto's lower than the provincial average?
Yes, it is much lower.
Wow.
And the provincial average is only 31 or 32%, which is extremely low still.
Right.
I mean, when we're comparing ourselves to the countries that are successful, like Spain, they average out about 70%.
Wow.
You know, because they're using the opt-out system,
Right.
which Spain had created. Now, for Spain was actually the original country that had created this system back in 1989. The opt-out system.
Okay.
Yeah. Some people want to refer to it as the presumed consent system. Those are usually critics. But basically, they knew how important organ donation was, and they realized it was a cure as well, and it would save a lot of money in their healthcare system. And so they managed to get unanimous approval to go ahead and create that law in Spain in 1989. And immediately afterwards, Spain led the world in organ donations. And then 21 other European countries adopted their system, which was then referred to as the Spanish model.
Okay.
Yeah, so all the countries that adopted it were Latin background.
Okay.
So was this a Latin thing? You know, was this more of a European Latin kind of thing? Because it seemed like the Anglo-Saxon countries would not approve it. And that's why I think what happened recently in the UK, England, is very important, because they've had a similar journey in the past 30 years as Canada in trying to persuade their country in adopting the Spanish model or the opt-out system. Here in Canada, we've had a few people, mainly it was, may he rest in peace, Peter Cormos from the Ontario NDP party.
He's from my hometown.
That's right.
Yeah.
He was really the biggest fighter, and I worked with him for years. I miss him, and he was very passionate. He made great arguments, and he was the biggest advocate for the opt-out bill. There was other smaller attempts by some federal members and other provincial members. Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia were talking about that they were leaning towards it at one point. You know, so there was these small, similar to England, they had, you know, similar bills that were coming up but didn't make it to the second reading. You know, in February, a couple of months ago, they adopted what they called a soft opt-out bill, and it was unanimously passed.
Where's that, in Britain?
In Britain.
Okay.
It was unanimously passed by all the parties.
Wow.
Yeah. And the reason why they called it a soft opt-out is because they added a provision which states that the family member can still veto the decision if they find evidence that their loved one tried to opt out.
So, George, maybe you can describe what the current system we have in Canada is and what its weaknesses are versus what they've just done in Great Britain.
Okay. So, presently, and for the past 30 years, Canada has been operating on what has been called an opt-in system. And what that means, the public can either register, depending on which province you live in, or sign their driver's license or health card indicating that they want to become an organ donor. Now, many times the family can and has vetoed their decision because they're asked at a very, very stressful time, and the family is answering the question under very unfavorable conditions. And Canadians lead very busy lives, and even though they want to be organ donors, they just don't get to that next step to do it, even though it just takes a couple of minutes to go on the registry to become, they're just too busy to do it. And finally, most of our minority communities don't get involved in these things, and that's where a lot of the population, and the reason why we have such a low rate is Toronto, for example, has only 20% of Torontonians that have registered, and it's mainly because of that factor. Mm-hmm. So all these things would greatly change as a result of creating an opt-out system, and where everybody would be registered.
Yeah, so I guess basically the main difference is that in the opt-in system like we have, the default answer is no, the organs are not available for donation. Whereas you switch to the opt-out system, the default answer is yes, organs are available for transplant, right? Which is a significant, to think that the change in the systems we go from a 20 to 30% organ donation rate to a 70% organ donation like they have in Spain. I mean,
that would be a dramatic increase. And what does that mean in lives? That would mean right now somebody is dying every day waiting for an organ transplant. If we adopted that system in time, it would probably come down to maybe one person dying a week. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands in the next few years, people that would be saved that would otherwise have died under the present system.
And I think I'm just going to mention, because I think for people watching, they may not be aware, they may not remember, but I think there's an awful lot of families, people out there touched by, someone in their family or in their circle of friends who's waiting for an organ transplant. And this is a very real situation. And you may not think about it just because, as you say, Canadians are living busy lives, but think about it. Maybe there's somebody right now that's waiting for an organ, and their life is at risk as a result.
Yeah, that is correct, and that's why we're doing what we're doing right now. There's 6 more days till the election day in the province. So what we're doing is plugging away relentlessly, giving each candidate the opportunity mm-hmm. to embrace this mm-hmm. and say, because what we're asking them to do, mm-hmm. and this is important here, we're asking them, they don't have to commit to the soft law or position. What we're asking them to do is, if elected, mm-hmm. create a referendum mm-hmm. in Ontario, and let's finally see how Ontarians feel about creating such a law similar to England, and that way they don't have to risk, because I feel that that's been always the problem. Every government that was in power didn't adopt that system because they weren't sure how the public felt about it. Right. So this, finally, by creating a referendum, we can clearly see how Ontarians feel. Mm-hmm. And I am confident that overwhelmingly Ontarians will approve it, and that's based on the 25 years of going through up and down the province in 10 campaigns and visiting hundreds of cities and towns and talking to over 1 million Ontarians from all walks of life. Overwhelmingly, over 90% of them said, "What are we waiting for? Let's adopt this system." So right now the race is so tight that where are those extra voters that can bring them to the finish line? If one of the candidates decided to embrace this and make the statement that they will do this immediately if elected, they will win the election. I am promising that, and they will find out that what you said, that this affects many Ontarians. Yes, in the past 25 years, there's been hundreds and thousands of people that have died waiting. That means how many families members were affected by that. But even the ones that had received it knew what they had to go through to get it, and how much better it would have been under the... So there is a large number of people that would give them reason to vote for somebody if they were going to adopt this new system.
And I'm just going to remind people that, your life, the reason you're here today is, your life was saved as a result of organ donation, right?
That's correct. In 1995, I received a liver transplant.
Yeah. And
I was so grateful that everybody does their own thing, to say thank you. I mean, we're told that we can write a letter to that anonymous donor, if it was cadaveric, that saved our life. And then we're grateful for having this. For me, it just went further than that. I just felt that I had to do something in a spectacular way to thank my anonymous donor family and to do my part in helping the problem. So after receiving my liver, I walked across the country, 12,000 kilometers, and it was just shortly after 95 that I did this. So I started talking about the opt-out system back then. And that's when it started going, other Canadians were just starting to talk about that system. But then after my campaign, I followed up with another campaign called Christopher's Wish, where a 13-year-old boy needed a liver transplant. And I organized a 200-city tour for him across the country. And so he had the opportunity at every city to do a press conference and plead to the public and our government to create an opt-out system. So these were the pleas coming from a 13-year-old boy saying, please, help save my life by adopting, so we had an emotional...
you had a real person in front of you.
We had a real person, yeah.
You had people could see that there was an actual life at stake.
Yeah.
Versus an abstract concept. Oh, we need to increase organ donations. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And during this whole 25 years, numerous times I was urging people who were against it, the idea, or critics of it to, let's sit down and let's talk about why you're so against it. Let's find out. And I always people were avoiding to engage with me. And so, what are any good reasons why we shouldn't have this? Are people against the idea of saving more lives? So it's time. That's why when I say Ontario and Canada has become complacent, because this has been going on for 25 years. There's a tinge of hope because the UK recently and finally passed their their version of what they call the soft opt-out bill. And Canada and the UK are very similar. We've gone through the same battles. But it was actually the plea of an 11-year-old girl who needed a liver transplant that caught the hearts of all the party members, and why they unanimously approved it. And that's besides the British Medical Association, who continued to support it and offer their evidence, and many other, So we have the same here in Canada, and how we can do it now is to have one of these candidates before June 7th say, I care about those people that are dying, and I'm going to stop, by creating a referendum as soon as I'm elected,
A referendum, or maybe, as you said, in Britain they didn't have a referendum, but they had done some market research, some polling, and they found out that the population was pretty much in favor of it. So maybe the same thing could happen in Ontario, and there's still time left for one of the candidates to step forward and make this a campaign issue and make a commitment to change the legislation and maybe win the election.
Sorry, you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Okay.
Go.
I have my cell that I'm waiting. 416-509-5719. Whether it's the candidate themselves or a representative from each party, to say that they're going to go that extra mile, or they're going to make that pledge. And I have my computer reaching out to all the media outlets to have the media approach the candidates, asking them that question directly. We all now know how important this is. I guarantee the first candidate that makes that commitment and decides to do this will become the next Premier of Ontario.
Okay, George. So that's great. Now we've got the picture of you here with the torch of life, and of course the website is torchoflife.com, and I suspect that regardless of what happens during the election, your efforts to keep putting this in the public agenda will continue, and I know that you're not going to rest until you see an improvement in the situation. So thanks, George, for coming in today. Thanks for all the work that you do, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. We're going to try and make this video go viral.
All right. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time here at thatchannel.com. Have a great weekend.